the work that you're doing with regard to delivering food and all that. I know it's a lot of work, it's a lot of challenge, but I appreciate the work that everybody's doing here. Just kind of where we are with the state. Last week, we talked about our push here for the final 3 weeks of April, the Stay Home, Stay Healthy, Stay Connected campaign, as well as our 6 rules for keeping Nebraska healthy, starting with, hey, stay home, no unnecessary, non-essential trips, work, but work from home when you can, and socially distance in the workplace. Shop once a week by yourself, don't take the kids. Help young people, help kids with the social distancing, which means avoid playgrounds and team sports, play at home. Help the seniors in our community, shop for them or run errands for them so they can stay home, but don't visit them in a long-term care facility. And then finally, our last rule is exercise. Exercise at home or with a socially distanced, appropriate social distance exercise. So that's what we're really pushing for these last few weeks here of April to, keep the push going here to get people to stay home, really, keep that social, physical distancing that we want, and work on flattening the curve here. I would say, broadly speaking, if you look what's going on here in the state, we've got, one, I would say by and large, people are doing the right thing with regard to social distancing. If you follow the IHME model that is on healthdata.org, you'll probably will have noticed that the projected deaths per day in Nebraska has gone down, that the date where we reach our peak has gone out, which means that it's spreading out, and which is the whole point of what we're doing here is to try and, flatten the curve and not overwhelm our healthcare system. So to that extent, we've been very successful. We really have flattened the curve out. Also, if you look at places like Grand Island, though, it can creep up on us really quickly. About a week ago, we were experiencing a 30% positivity rate testing. Overall with the state right now, our overall statewide rate's about 7.5%. And that has been going up over the last 2 weeks or so. But in Grand Island, it was over 30%. And a week ago in Grand Island, we only had probably 4 ICU rooms out of 16 being used and 3 ventilators for COVID patients. Today, now we've got 14 out of 16 ICU rooms and ventilators being used right now. So you can see it can move very quickly once you start hitting that positivity rate going up. And again, the whole point is to make sure we don't overwhelm the healthcare system, that everybody who needs that hospital bed, that ICU bed, that ventilator will be able to get access to one if they need one. So that's why we're doing all of this, is to really make sure we don't overwhelm the healthcare system. And as again, when we look at cases like in what happened in Grand Island last week versus this week, we can see very quickly it can catch up on us. So we need to continue to focus on this. Obviously, you're all aware that, in the DHM for the state, we've got schools operating without students till May 31st, and all extracurricular activities are also canceled as a part of that. One of the things we found is that people were doing was club sports or some of these non-school affiliated sports. Were taking the opportunity, maybe even talking to some of you about using your ball diamonds and so forth. And so we made that part of the DHM that closed or canceled club sports for both adults and youth. And really did that to line up with the school calendar through May 31st, so that people would, again, get the picture that, hey, the whole point of why the kids aren't in the classroom is so they don't get together in big team sports and, spread the virus. I mean, that's defeating the purpose if you have them go together and play those big team sports. So I hope that was helpful to folks to be able to do that, at least give some guidance so there was it didn't put you in an awkward position of having to tell people no, so we could just really standardize and make clear to everybody that really, at least through the end of May, we really want people to avoid those kind of team activities, because that's the same as kind of being in a classroom. So those are the things we got right now. We're going to continue to reinforce that message around people staying home here over the course of the next couple of weeks. We will be looking at what sorts of things we might be able to do to loosen restrictions going forward, but nothing will be done with regard to, 10-person rule or anything like that, at least through the end of April. And I really don't envision anything that would impact schools from the standpoint of being able to do anything this school year, because, again, schools are the highest concentration of people we have in our society, and that's what we're trying to avoid. So as we do loosen restrictions, it really won't lead to anybody being able to have a school year this spring. I think we all should just be planning for next fall and what do we need to do to get the kids ready to move up a grade. And then again, we'll have our own challenges when we want to call school back in next year, or next fall, but we'll have more data by that point as well. So really what we're going to be looking at is kind of focus on what are hospitalization rates. We're going to be looking at expanding testing so we can have a better idea of what's going on in the state. We did do more testing in Grand Island and Kearney in the early part of last week, and then we moved it to Scottsbluff and Kimball to the end part of that week. And now we're going to be looking at places like Dakota County. We're probably going to be doing some testing in Hastings, also in North Platte and McCook. So we'll continue to move some of those testing folks, those testing teams from the National Guard around to be able to do some of the community testing, because we've got a little bit of capacity to be able to do that. And that will help us get an idea of what's going on in other parts of the state to be able to help us, get a better complete picture. But again, our real focus here from now until the end of April is really going to be hammering home that message that, hey, stay home, stay healthy, stay connected. And with that, Commissioner, I'll turn it back over to you.
No, it's really good, and I appreciate that, Governor. I think in part, kind of reiterating that we won't be in a position where schools are opening again until the fall. I know later this week I'll be having some conversations with some school officials and leaders about whether, what the summer even looks like and what we can be doing to be more and more prepared. So I just appreciate your consistent message that we won't see school activities or extracurricular activities through the end of May, and I think that's been important. We'll kind of keep going through this, and I encourage you, Governor, to chime in whenever you would like. I don't think Dr. Antone's joined us, so I'm gonna go ahead and what I will say, and I've got a slide up here, Governor, just so you know. So last Monday we had roughly 409 cases about at the time of this meeting, and I don't know if it's gone up, but I think we have 814 as of today across the state, and so we're seeing that growth. And so the importance of our schools' role in both what we're doing from sustaining environments and without students in our schools, but also communicating to our communities. And I believe, I think I probably speak for all education leaders across the state. We're trying to look for every way that we can be helpful in sharing that message. So thanks for what you're doing.
Yep. Hey, so Commissioner, if I can just jump in again. So your numbers are accurate. I was just looking over my own chart here. And what that represents, of course, is roughly a doubling in a week's time. And that's pretty consistent with what we see from, at least when I got briefed on this over a month ago, that the doubling time for this virus is every 7 to 10 days. It's a very communicable virus. So, you're exactly right. It's about doubled over the course of last week, and that's kind of what we'd expect.
Yeah, so we keep watching that, and I keep working on it too. So I have, I think the next slide I'll have advanced here will give us a little of opportunity to talk with some of our other folks that are participating today. So we have other local health officials. I believe I've got Jeremy Eshelman from Two Rivers, and Michelle, is it Beaver is how you pronounce your last name? It's spelled differently, but I think that's right. So I'm going to welcome Jeremy and Michelle to kind of give an update on what you're seeing in your areas, and Two Rivers and South Heartland, I think is right for Michelle. So Jeremy, I see you're unmuted. Michelle, I think you can unmute your line. So.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. This is Jeremy Eshelman, Two Rivers Public Health Department. And we're in South Central Nebraska. I say, generally speaking, Kearney, Holdridge, Lexington, in that general vicinity. At this point, I don't know our exact case count today. They're working on quite a few cases that came in today, but we're in the ballpark of like the 40s, let's say 40s, 50s mark right now. So a couple of things I wanted to mention, and thank you for all the work the governor, in partnership with us, we've been able to do multiple testing sites in the Kearney area, including emergency responders, healthcare personnel. We're actually conducting testing at the Central Nebraska Veterans Home also, using some of their own staff, but great partnerships overall to YRTC, Department of Health and Human Services, and State of Nebraska. Really appreciate all the work that's happening there. So, I did recently read an op-ed article about herd immunity as our only solution at this point, just an alternative opinion. And I wanted to speak really briefly to that. We often in public health talk about herd immunity, and the premise of herd immunity is that if you take a herd of whatever it is, cattle, let's say, since we're a big beef producing state. And I grew up on a ranch and things of that nature. So, if you take a herd of cattle, let's say 100 cattle, and let's say a certain percentage of those you make sure they're protected in some way from acquiring a disease, and usually it's through vaccination. And what that does is if there's a certain percent that is unable to be vaccinated or is missed for some reason, then it protects those that are most vulnerable. Well, so the premise of herd immunity in this case is a fallacy, because really what it amounts to is no protection mechanism at all. We would just let it just sweep through our whole population. Those that could be protected would, those that die would also die. And so we'd see a lot higher mortality rate overall as our prevalence went up. And so that's one thing I just want to speak to really quickly, because that's something that that's been thrown out there as an alternative argument to flattening the curve, as an economic argument more so. So otherwise, a couple of questions I guess we've seen in our neck of the woods have been around graduations and looking at, should we be considering graduations, maybe early to mid-May. And the recommendations we've been really proposing have been that's presumptuous to be planning that way. You should be looking more beyond that, possibly into midsummer. Kind of like the same argument to be made with swimming pools, that swimming pools and a lot of municipalities shouldn't even consider hiring lifeguards for the very early part of the year, which is the typical traditional, school gets out and we start thinking about things like that, and that's really not indicated at this point in time. So otherwise, there was a morbidity and mortality weekly report from the CDC that just came out a couple days ago, and it really showed the great work that's happening in Nebraska overall as a state. And I want to speak to that really briefly, because it really looked at the cumulative incidence of COVID-19, and I always like to think we're pretty competitive with other states in football and other things. So I just want to look at how we're doing overall with most states, and from what I'm reading, it looks like we're doing really well. March 31st, the numbers that came in, 9.2 incidents that's based on 100,000 people. So, and that's about the population of the Two Rivers Public Health Department District is right under 100,000 people. So if you think of in our 7 counties, about 9 people or so, gotten sick that week. Then if you fast forward a week beyond that, then that grew to about 25 people for 100,000 people. So that was a cumulative incidence increase of about 15 per 100,000. Now, typically in some of the hardest hit areas in the United States, you're seeing that number actually be in the triple digits, often, closer to 200 for a cumulative incidence increase. So it just shows the directed health measures, how they're working, and the work that's happening across the state of Nebraska overall. And other things, just to mention, there's some questions we've been fielding from the media about, the information we're pushing out at a local health department level and consistency, comparing to the state dashboard. And there's certain nuances that happen from a data collection standpoint. As an example, we try to put out a press release once a day, typically between 4 and 6 o'clock, just to collect whatever's happening throughout that day. From a resource perspective, it becomes more efficient for us. Well, it doesn't always mirror when we actually would get positive confirmations. And part of that is we know there's some that positive test results that came in, but they aren't always clearly linked to a certain county at that point. And that may happen, within a certain hour time period. And so sometimes there's certain nuances that happen from day to day, but I just want to assure everyone that the numbers that we report are accurate numbers, and there just can be a slight nuance from day to day, how that's reported on the state database compared to what we're actually putting out at the local level. But otherwise, we really appreciate all the work. Like the governor mentioned, the vast majority of our population congregates in schools, and those are our traditionally terrific partners. We really appreciate all the work that's happened in that area. So otherwise, Commissioner, I guess I would turn it over to Dr. Beaver, and if she has comments.
She may be either having a hard time unmuting or, oh, there she is. All right, very good. Michelle. Michelle, are you able to?
Oops. Hello, I'm sorry. We're working on a testing event and I'm connecting with the National Guard and I'm unable to talk right now. I'm sorry.
We'll come back to you later if you're able to, and that's fine. So
thank you.
yeah, thanks, Michelle. So as you can see,
Hey, Commissioner Bloomstead, hey, can I just jump in here for real quick? This is Governor Ricketts again.
Yep.
Just, just on that, I want to just build upon the comment that was just made about the teamwork. That has really been also apparent in Grand Island. I want to compliment Dr. Grover for the help with getting communications out to the school families, especially ones that may have English as a second language. Again, it just really working with the public health department and the school district and everybody else. St. Francis has been great about getting messaging out in multiple languages. JBS has been doing it. It really does take a team effort. And so I want to just thank again the schools as being partners to help us get the word out and help slow the spread of the virus here in the state. So just shout out there for Grand Island Public Schools.
Yeah, thanks, Governor. And I think I'll go ahead and move on, and then if Michelle is able to join us later, but obviously you can see our local public health folks are extremely busy. Our public health folks generally are extremely busy. And again, Jeremy, thank you for joining us too. So as we keep going, if you want to chime in on anything else, just let us know. So I want to move on, and I have, I think, Larry Ann Polk from ESU 7 and Dan Schnoes from ESU 3 to kind of take on a couple topics around the conversations that we're hearing from around the state. And so I know we've got three big topics anyway, kind of a statewide consistent message that and trying to work on between the Department of Education, the governor, and obviously kind of interpretations on statutes. One thing we continue to work on, maybe a little bit of messaging around data submission timeframe for our school folks, and then also around summer reading programs and other things. So Larry Ann or Dan, would you like to chime in on any of those types of questions?
Sure, I can start. This is Larry Ann. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you just fine.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for giving us a chance to speak with you again. We meet as a coordinating council every week and discuss what issues are coming from our school districts statewide. So these three issues came up this last week among some others, but these are the ones that were highest priority to talk to you about. So first of all, there has been such great communication from the governor. These Monday meetings with you, Commissioner, have been fantastic. And then we are getting a lot of guidance and advice from various school attorneys across the state. So can you talk to us a bit how, naturally the messages come from a little bit different filter from each one of you. So could you talk to us about what we're doing to try to work on consistency of messages?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that has become important, and there's different interpretations by certainly from school attorneys and other fronts. I've been out there trying to make sure that school officials are aware that we're going to provide whatever flexibility, whether it's called waivers or whether it's called something else, around certainly everything from school year to other things. But as we keep diving in, there's a lot of additional questions I think that surface. And so I think, as I've shared with the ESU folks and with some of our school attorneys and others, that we'll continue to work together. As I still have with the governor on, there's some work that's going on to put some requests into the governor around the potential for waiving certain statutory provisions as necessary. And so Brian Halstead is on the line, and I think I have a slide later, but we can hit it up right now. That just we're trying to work with school attorneys to make sure that the messaging that they're getting out is consistent with our approaches as well. Like we discussed last week, the state board had met and granted kind of, I'll say, emergency provisions for me anyway, and for us at the department level. And then we keep diving into the rules and regs, and those things that we can waive, obviously we will be, and those things that might take additional powers from the governor, we'll present those in front of the governor and continue to do that. So Brian, I don't know if you have anything else on that particular front you wanted to address, but you're welcome to.
Thank you, Commissioner. As the slide shows you, last week, I contacted the Nebraska Council of School Attorneys. That's an organization that represents all attorneys in Nebraska who provide some form of legal advice to any of our school districts, educational service units, or even non-public schools. I asked them to submit to the commissioner a list of laws they felt there was going to be need to waive. Received from them on Sunday evening the lists that they had compiled. We at the department are going through that list to narrow down what actually are requirements that maybe the governor needs to consider, and then the others that the state board or the department have the authority to address going forward. So we hope to get something for the commissioner to look at and send to the governor yet this week about these state statutes that may need some waiver by the governor.
Thanks, Brian. I'll kind of go back to Larry Ann and to Dan. Maybe we can go back to that slide if we could. And so one of the other questions, whether I don't know if Dan or Larry Ann was going to take it on, was around June data submissions, or just maybe data submissions and data reporting and those types of concerns. So you want to highlight that question?
Good afternoon, Commissioner. Dan Schnoes. Thanks for having us on today. Yeah, it's kind of a big question here, but state reporting is important for all of us, and we just want to make sure we're prepared, and we're prepared to help all of our districts in getting stuff ready to submit. Are there any dates and timelines or anything that can be provided yet, or give us an idea of when we'll be able to hear when some of that information will be available for us to begin working with our districts on what we'll need to submit in June?
Yeah, no, and I appreciate again the kind of the feedback and questions from folks. And I have Dean Folkers on. I think I have a slide related to data as well that maybe we can put up. And so one of the things we actually, just similar to what we're dealing with maybe on other fronts, but trying to gather up all the questions. And again, thanks to ESUs and thanks to all the school districts for kind of providing an orderly way for us to begin to gather that. So we'll continue to do that work. We are also looking at the flexibility around the federal waivers and what may come out of the CARES Act funding or other flexibility around funding. So there's some other concerns or considerations, I guess, as we go forward. And then we're still really looking for strategies to kind of mitigate the interruptions of certain key data. And I'll just use it for instance, right? Obviously, we use average daily membership and average daily attendance as part of the school finance formula. I think we're going to have to be able to mitigate how those data are going to be used, and preparing some work there to think about how we can address those types of issues. And so I'm going to ask Dean Folkers to say a few words about the, how we're going to handle the other data reporting and kind of what the timelines are and what our hopes are to kind of get information out to schools on that front. So Dean looks very young in his picture, right?
Yes, it is a younger picture. So, yes, Commissioner, you identified, I think, a significant number of the pieces of the puzzle that actually have been happening over the past several weeks. Staff at the department have been collecting the questions, working through legitimate answers and options, and thinking through all of the implications. So there's really sort of two pieces of this puzzle. One piece is the collection side. And so the general rule of thumb when it comes to the collection due dates and process, that those will, for the most part, remain intact. And so the June 15th deadline, the audit window, June 30th, those timeframes will be in place, as well as the process to request data changes or submit data late, that process will remain intact. So the other piece of it, though, is the use of the data. As you mentioned, the calculations and a lot of the different pieces. How do we report grades? How do we do attendance? Some of those kinds of questions in this sort of COVID space are pieces of the puzzle that we're wrestling with, have some clarity, are targeting the end of this week to have our first round of guidance, if you will, or frequently asked questions available on the COVID website on NDE. We'll also have a bulletin item out in communication of the progress, as well as we add new questions or new answers to questions. We'll continue to use that as a mechanism for immediate notification as well.
And one of the things I was just thinking about a little bit, Dean, was as we do this, we'll start to kind of release more guidance, information, those types of fronts, but probably have some more conversations with folks around the state. And Governor, this might be kind of one that you and I've already had a conversation about, but how do we use some of the CARES Act funding around education? And I do anticipate, and I think I'd mentioned before, that we'll be having further conversations with some folks this week. One of the groups that's gathering up this week is my Commissioners Advisory Group, which consists of about 24 superintendents statewide. So I do anticipate kind of talking about what these funds are available for, some other timing issues, and Governor, I hope to be able to bring some of that information back around where funding might be used in the education space for that work too.
Great.
So maybe the last question, I think there was one more point around from the ESU's perspective that they'd gathered up, which is around summer reading program. And this might be an area in which we would also have some need to look at the statute and look at waivers around the statute. But the summer reading program, whether Larry Ann or Dan wanted to highlight any of that, and then I'm going to have Corey Epler join for a little bit of that conversation. So.
Sure, this is Larry Ann again. And the questions were just really related to the Reading Improvement Act and understanding that those requirements and rules are statutory, so there may need to be some assistance from the governor there. But if Corey has anything more to add to that perhaps some timelines and deadlines or specific things you need the schools to be thinking of up until that would start.
Yeah.
Thanks, Larry Ann. This is Corey Epler. I think first I just want to articulate that we continue to be, very aware of this being a really important time for our earliest and our youngest readers. So thinking about how we can, in a continuity of learning approach, really ensure that students in kindergarten, first, second, and third grade are still being able to access opportunities to expand and enhance their reading abilities. Within the Nebraska Reading Improvement Act, there will be a need to examine one of the requirements around the third assessment of the year. So as most of the schools were not in their school buildings well into March, we anticipate that many districts were not able to administer the third assessment. So that is one item that we will be asking for a waiver of law around within the Reading Improvement Act. I'm getting a lot of questions around the summer reading program specifically. And what I'm finding is that many districts already had plans in place of how they would make available a summer reading program to students who have been identified as having a reading deficiency, and that is included in part of their individualized reading improvement plan. Now, those summer programs will certainly shift if they were not virtual, if you were planning on doing something face-to-face. But what I've asked my staff to do is to begin identifying opportunities that could be delivered in a virtual format for a summer reading program. I think this is where we'll really be able to tap into our community libraries, and thinking perhaps a little bit differently about how we make those programs available. So certainly it's an important consideration, and if you have questions about summer reading programs or what might be available, you can reach out to me or reach out to NDE's reading specialist, Abby Burke. Dr. Burke is definitely available and willing to help as well.
So thank you, and thanks again for folks. What I want to highlight just a little bit, that the questions that you continue to submit or continue to discuss at a regional level are really quite important for us to kind of keep addressing. I wanted to maybe highlight just a couple things about, and I think we have summer slide on summer, and I don't know, Corey, if you had any more for a broad discussion on summer learning. I am very concerned that it'll be difficult for, and as Jeremy, I think, had mentioned earlier about his observations from a public health standpoint, we can definitely expect disruption yet in the summer about how we're able to provide different services, and it's probably not gathering up large groups of students again. And so I think being prepared for various remote environments is going to be important. I think there's been some interest or expressed interest in how can we scale up perhaps some opportunities for online that might be greater scale than individual districts are able to do. And I've even had conversations at a national level around the possibility of scaling up some things a bit more nationally, access to some of those materials. So again, I'll be asking for your creativity and your thoughts as we keep going. Encourage you to use our website to provide us additional insights. Like I mentioned, my advisor this Wednesday afternoon to talk through some additional things. That's superintendents from across the state for the most part. I'm going to actually continue to, and I think we took a break given it was Good Friday, but with our non-public schools, kind of reiterating and giving an opportunity for some conversation around non-public settings. And we continue to address the challenges on students with IEPs and those fronts as well. And so in all these different settings, it's obviously been a lot of disruptions for students and families and schools. But I think as the governor has already pointed out, and as our local health officials continue to point out, it's really a critical time for the next few weeks for us to play that role and continue to do that work. So I think that's what I have for today. And yeah, again, your questions underneath our website. Governor, I think maybe I'm joining you later this week for a press conference. I wanted to thank you for, I think I heard you signed our Perkins plan or provided us a letter or however that necessarily works. So our business continues on that front. And I had a phone call just a little earlier today from Assistant Secretary Frank Brogan from the U.S. Department of Ed, talking to me a little bit about CARES Act funding. So I look forward to working with you on that front. Is there anything you want to say in conclusion, Governor?
Nope. Just again, I want to thank everybody. Appreciate everything that you're doing, and let us know what else we can do to be able to make sure that we're helping our kids be as successful as we can as we go through what is really an unprecedented and really challenging time for everybody.
Well, I appreciate very much the partnership and going on from there. And I suspect, and I want to thank Michelle and Jeremy for joining today. And it sounds like Michelle had her hands full, as Jeremy probably does, as everyone probably does. But just thanks to everyone again, and we'll continue. There'll be more information coming out this week on several of these different fronts. And again, appreciate your comments and continued dialogue to help address the challenges that we're all facing together. So thanks a lot, everyone, and we'll talk soon. And again, next week at 4 o'clock, we'll do this again. So thanks a lot. Take care.
All right. Thanks, folks.